indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Right? No, I don't need that. I'm wired, as I've been told.
Anyway, as I said, my name is Wayne Walvoord, and will be the host. But John Graboski will be the moderator, and obviously Gabe Evans will be our main speaker. But a little bit of background for me: I've been with the Convention of the States now for 5 years. I'm retired. Have had a splendid life with 4 children, and gifted now with 14 grandkids. I was born in Utah, but raised in Denver in the 40s, 50s, and the 60s. I'm that old. Then I came back after the Peace Corps and graduated from the University of Colorado. But I did return to my home state in 2001 in Colorado and moved to Brighton in 2019. And that's enough about me. Just briefly, today we're going to be having Gabe, and he will be speaking for about 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes, relating what has happened during his first term, and maybe some things about the future and his next term. And then I will introduce John Graboski. John is our legislative liaison statewide for Colorado. He works very closely with the people in Denver and is there weekly during the session and has people meet people like Gabe, who is my personal representative. But at this time, other than you thinking of any questions that you may have for Gabe, there will be people with microphones. If I can walk around with this one, I will bring it to you. And Gabe will answer 20, 30 minutes, whatever time your questions want. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to John.
I'm going to start out with a very important announcement I was asked to make. The restrooms are in the lobby to the right, behind the displays. The men's, I'm really going to rile things up here. The men's rooms to the right, the women's rooms to the left. And in most buildings, you'll notice the men's room is on the right. And do you know why that is? We know men are right. They're not throwing anything. Okay, good. Legislative liaison is a fancy term for lobbyist. I am a registered lobbyist with the state of Colorado, and I will note unpaid. I am a volunteer. Thanks to Pastor Steve for allowing us this facility, use of this facility, and also Gabe Evans for making the time today. This is the first event of this type that we're holding. We want to create a model for this and take it to the other House districts, the other 64 House districts between now and the next election. I think there's 3 things I want you to know about this whole process and what I do. One is, as I was telling Gabe before we started, in the last 2 sessions, I've learned how hard our legislators work. The demands on their time, their brain share, etc., are significant, especially during the session. So if you ever have a problem with, hey, my emails aren't getting answered, or my voicemails, guess what? They're busy. They really are. I can attest to it. And off session as well, since Thursday night. What? Eight different?
4. Did we do anything on Friday? I know I've done at least 4 events since Thursday night.
Okay, since Thursday night. So you should all be very thankful for that. This is not a high-paying job, I can assure you. The second thing is that, as the quote legislative liaison, my primary function is to advocate for passing the COS resolution, the call on Article 5 convention. Okay. There are those in the legislative staff, I call it advocating, but I've heard it called pestering, harassing, and annoying. But it's all part of the job. The other part is engaging our grassroots. By the way, you're the grassroots. All right? Our citizens, our voters. Engaging them and getting them to communicate with their legislators. By email, by text, in person if at all possible. in the last 2 years, we've taken hundreds of citizens to the Capitol during the legislative sessions so they can see how the sausage is made. It's been very, very effective, and I've enjoyed it a great deal. And I think that's probably the most important job, that connection between the citizens and the legislators. Okay, let's see. I'm not going to go into much more because Wayne will have some things to say at the end regarding what you can do outside. But Representative Gabe Evans, you all have a piece of paper on your chairs that have a brief bio. And I'll summarize it by saying he's a Christian, he's a Coloradan, and he's a cop. What can go wrong? What can go wrong? And he's also a devoted husband with a lovely family. I was quite impressed that he attended Patrick Henry College, which was founded by Michael Ferris, one of the co-founders of Convention of States. Quite impressed by that. So, without any further from me, I welcome our guest, Gabe Evans.
Thank you so much for that introduction. You guys can all hear me? Yep. Cool. And thank you, Wayne, Pastor Steve, Bob in the back doing sound, for putting this on and taking your time out on a Sunday afternoon to come and hear me talk for a little bit. So I'll just give you a little bit of background about myself. We'll talk a little bit about what happened down at the state capitol this year. I'm going to give you a legislative update, and then we'll leave some time for questions. That work for everybody?
Yes.
Cool. So, like you heard, I'm a Colorado native, born and raised here in Colorado. After I graduated high school, I was actually a staffer down at the state capitol almost 20 years ago now. So kind of learned a little bit how the process works. Thought I was going to go one direction in my life, but God had other plans for me. I actually ended up going to Patrick Henry College, which is on the East Coast in the Virginia area, greater DC area. That's where I got my degree. That's where I met my wife. And that's where I joined the Army. And so I originally thought in the Army I wanted to be an Army Ranger. Then I spent 2 weeks in Fort Lewis, Washington getting rained on all the time and decided, you know what, I need to get a job where I like it, get to sleep inside sometimes. So decided, you know what, I'm going to see if I can talk the Army into teaching me how to fly a helicopter. Did that successfully after I graduated. The Army sent me down to Fort Rucker, Alabama, learned how to fly Black Hawk helicopters. Knew I wanted to come back to Colorado, so talked my way into the outfit out at Buckley Air Force Base, Colorado Army National Guard. And I spent basically the next decade flying with those guys, both overseas and then every time we have fires, floods, search and rescues, all of the stuff that the National Guard does here in Colorado. Now, the National Guard actually flies more than active duty does. We have the same federal flight minimums, but then we also are the only component that can go do state missions like fighting wildfires. So we actually fly more than our active duty component, our active duty brothers and sisters do. But it's the National Guard, so they pay you part-time even though you're basically working full-time. So that meant I had to go get another job to actually pay the bills. That was the end of the Obama economy, so after about 150 resumes, the first folks that called me back was the Arvada Police Department. They said, do you want to be a cop? And I said, yes, I'm very passionate about not starving to death. So, went through police academy, became a cop, and for about 8 years I did both jobs. I spent about 45 hours a week being a cop, another 25, 30 hours a week being a soldier, except for when they deployed me, then I was gone for a year. And that went on until about 2018 when my wife quite reasonably said, look, Gabe, it's time to grow up. You're married, you have 2 kids, you can only have one all-consuming job where you get shot at. Pick one. So, picked law enforcement, stepped away from the Army after 12 years in 2019, focused on my law enforcement career, promoted a couple of times. I was a sergeant and then I was a lieutenant with the Arvada Police Department. Things were going great, and then 2020 happened. So if you recall 2020, that was all the riots, and we saw a lot of really terrible legislation come out of the state capitol down in Denver that absolutely handcuffed law enforcement's ability to actually go out and do their job and try to keep communities safe. And so as a lieutenant and a watch commander, I'm sitting there watching my community fall apart. We're Colorado's #1 state in the nation for auto theft. We're the #2 state in the nation for property crimes. We've gone up from number 27 to number 16 relative to the other states, so this is being graded on a curve. We've moved up 11 spaces relative to all the other states for violent crime. In 2021, Denver actually beat San Francisco. San Francisco's got about 900,000 people in it, and they had 56 homicides that year. Denver has about 700,000 people in it, so about 200,000 less. We had 96 homicides in Denver. So per capita in 2021, Denver almost had double the homicide rate of San Francisco. And I got to be on the front lines of all of that as a law enforcement officer. And there was literally nothing I could do about it because of how the state legislature had handcuffed just good, common sense, community-oriented law enforcement. So I decided, you know what, I can't do my job. I can't fulfill that oath that I swore to uphold and defend the Constitution and take care of my community because of what the state legislature's done. So I'm going to go and I'm going to fight the crazy people down at the source, down at the state legislature. So last year, 2022, I quasi-resigned, quasi-retired. After 10 years, you get to call yourself a retired police officer, and that's a federal law. So after a little over 10 years in law enforcement, I stepped away from that, ran for House District 48. So we're all in House District 48 now. It starts down at about 120th south of Brighton, has all of Brighton, the unincorporated areas around Brighton, and then follows the Highway 85 corridor up to but not including Greeley. So I have like Fort Lupson, Keensburg, Hudson, Lockleigh, basically that whole tract of land up to but not including Greeley. Won my election last November. And if you follow politics at all, everybody thought, hey, Colorado's traditionally a purple state, right? We like balance. Yeah, we didn't get closer to balance last November. It went completely the other way. For the first time in over 100 years, one party in Colorado rules everything, and they don't just rule everything, they rule it by supermajority margins. So in the legislature, state legislature down at the state capitol in Denver, we talk about three magic numbers, 33, 18, and 1. Just like in Congress in Washington, D.C., if you're going to pass a state law, you have to get a majority of the state House to vote for it. Then you have to get a majority of the state Senate to vote for it. And then you have to get the governor to sign it. So there's 65 state representatives in the state of Colorado. Each of us represent about 90,000 folks. I'm one of them. So to get a majority in the state House, you got to get 33 votes. To get a majority in the state Senate, you got to get 18 votes, and then you got to get the governor to sign it. So with that being kind of the balance point, Republicans in Colorado are at like I said, a century-long low point. We have 19 Republicans in the state House to 46 Democrats. We have 12 Republicans in the state Senate to 23 Democrats. And then we have 0 statewide office holders. Governor Polis and everybody else, the Democrats have everything. So what that means is we're effectively a speed bump for anybody that wants to push more government, big government, more spending, more taxes, and more regulation. That was what this last legislative session looked like. So per the state constitution in Colorado, the state legislature runs from the middle of January to the middle of May, 120 consecutive calendar days. And so into that 120 days is where we have to get all of the bills and all of the legislation and all the state lawmaking done that's going to happen for that year. And so what we saw this year was really with the numbers, and I try not to make this partisan, but I mean it's partisan, so I'll say it like it is. We saw the Democrats push more big government, more spending, more regulation, and more tax on freedom, really than we've ever seen in decades in Colorado, just because of the numbers that they had. It started off, it seems like it starts every year with either guns or abortion. We did both of those big debates this year. They had 5 big bills that came after guns, things like allowing counties to regulate whether or not you can even shoot on your own private property, trying to raise the age for people to be able to purchase firearms, expanding the red flag law. There was a whole bunch of different anti-Second Amendment legislation that they brought. And unfortunately, when they got 46 votes, and you only need 33 to pass a bill, they were able to get a lot of this stuff passed. We, the conservative folks that want smaller government, lower taxes, and less regulation, we fought them as long and as hard as we could. We had some sessions where we were on the floor for like 30 hours, so we call it the floor of the State House, where everybody makes their arguments and speeches. We held the floor for something like 30 hours, just trying to get them to negotiate with us, get them to take things out of the bill, and at the end of the day, they used, it's called Rule 14. They talk about censorship. They said, okay, we're done listening to you guys argue. We're not interested in arguing. We're going to call the question now. We're going to limit debate, and we're just going to take a vote on this. So they effectively silenced us. They removed our ability via Rule 14 and Rule 16, which are procedural, just house rules that they can use. They removed our ability to even stand up and be able to argue for these small government, pro-freedom beliefs. They did it on the Second Amendment argument first. Then they moved on to the pro-life argument, and they passed a series of even more radical bills. So Colorado already had some of the most pro-abortion laws anywhere in the country. They added to them. They've made abortion so easy to get in Colorado that now there's really nowhere else for them to go there. So this year, dead in their sights was crisis pregnancy centers. And so they started bringing legislation to basically limit what crisis pregnancy centers, what services they could offer. And so we made all of the arguments of, look, this is absolutely outside the scope of government. You now have government literally picking winners and losers. They're saying we're going to empower abortion clinics, but we're going to regulate, restrict, and increase liability for crisis pregnancy centers. And so again, we argued against all of that stuff. They steamrolled us, they used Rule 14 and Rule 16 to shut us up. Then we moved on to land use and taxes. So I've worked for all three levels of the government, federal, state, and local, and what I tell folks is the federal government gets a lot of the attention, but they actually control very little of your day-to-day life outside of running up the federal deficit and destroying our economy. But your day-to-day life, who fixes the sidewalks, who decides what businesses are going to go in, who fixes the streets, who does all of that zoning, who decides if your neighbor can put something in their backyard or things like that, all of that stuff is handled at the local level. And what the state wanted to do, what the governor wanted to do this year is take all of that away from the local level, take that away from the city of Brighton, take that away from Adams County, and centralize it at the state. So no longer does the mayor of Brighton and the Brighton City Council, which is the lowest level of government, the level of government that is most responsive to people, no longer does that government get to control basically how Brighton grows and is built and how streets and businesses and sidewalks and streetlights. All of that stuff would have been removed from the local level and moved to a vast state bureaucracy overseen by the governor. And so that was something that was the one thing that we were actually able to kill this year. One big thing that the governor really wanted that we were able to stop. And that was because there were actually some Democrats that said, this is too radical even for us. And so the entire Republican caucus, in conjunction with some Democrats that had actually served, like on city councils or as county commissioners, said, this is too much. This is too far, too radical. This is centralizing too much power at the state level. Even for us, we were able to stop the land grab bill. That's what we called it. It was basically the governor was trying to take control over the usage of all the land in the state of Colorado. Governor didn't really like that. So then the last thing that he pushed really, really hard for was something that you might have all heard about now. Everybody knows their property taxes went up, right? Okay, so I'm going to give you just a quick breakdown of how property taxes work in the state of Colorado. Property taxes in the state of Colorado are based on three things. You have the value of your property, and that's just based on the market, right? If the market value goes up, your property value goes up. If the market value goes down, your valuation and your taxes go down. So you have the value of your property. Then you have the assessment rate. So that's just an arbitrary number that the state sets. Think of it as like your tax rate. And then you have your mill levy. Your mill levy is basically the local government. So most folks know, hey, my property taxes go to the schools, they go to the fire department, they go to the police department, they go to those local governments. That's set by a mill levy. And all that mill levy says is basically how many thousandths of a mill is a thousandth of a dollar. So 1 cent is 100th, a mill is 1,000th. And it's a very simple equation. Whatever your property value is, times the assessment rate, times the mill levy, and then you get whatever your property tax is for that year. And so for the purposes of determining the value of your property, what you're going to be taxed at, that valuation happens every 2 years in even numbered years on June 30th. So everybody's property taxes for 2023 and 2024, they were all determined. The value for that tax purpose was determined on June 30th, 2022. Well, if you follow the housing market, the real estate market here in Colorado, that was the absolute height of the COVID-induced housing market, disaster that we had here. Everybody's property was valued just at an outrageous amount because once people figured out, hey, I can work from home, I can live anywhere in the country or the world that I want. We had a lot of people move to Colorado because they want to live here, and that drove up the property values for everybody. June 30th, 2022 was really the top of that bubble. And just through coincidence, that is when property values for tax purposes lock in for the next 2 years. So that is what drove, that's a large part of what drove the property tax hike that everybody saw. So when it comes to the property tax hike, of course you would expect the Republicans and the Democrats to have two different solutions. The Republican solution was very simple. It was a 7-page bill. Everybody knows what I mean when I say a bill. A bill is a proposed law. So the Republicans' proposed solution to this only took 7 pages to explain, and it said, hey, we recognize that everybody's property values went up because June 30th, 2022 was kind of the top of that COVID-induced housing bubble, that real estate bubble. Let's just skip 2022's data. We'll take a 2-year timeout and we'll continue to pay property taxes at the rate that we're already using that was based on 2020's valuation. 2-year timeout, skip 2022, we'll reassess in 2024. It took 7 pages for us to explain this concept. Very simple, very straightforward, absolutely not what the other side wanted, because the other side likes to tax, they like to spend, and they like to regulate. And in the state of Colorado, their top target is this thing called the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. The Taxpayer Bill of Rights does a lot of things, but it does 2 big things. The first big thing that the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, so this is a Colorado Taxpayer Bill of Rights. If you go to Kansas or Wyoming, they don't have this. This is a Colorado thing. The Colorado Taxpayer Bill of Rights does a couple of things. Number one, it says that any time that government wants to raise taxes, it has to go to a vote of the people on the ballot. The people have to have a chance to vote before taxes can be raised. The second thing that the Taxpayer Bill of Rights does is it sets another equation. And it says that state government can only spend money based on an equation that incorporates population growth times inflation. Basically what it's trying to do is say, hey, here's the size of government. We want to keep government the same size. We don't want to grow government. Now, even with the Taxpayer Bill of Rights limitation in place, government in Colorado has already grown about 57%, even when you adjust it for population times inflation. When I was working down at the state capitol in 2005, the state budget was about $15 billion. That was like the total spending money that the state had from all of the different revenue sources. 2 years ago, last year, the state passed a 41 or 43, I can't remember the number now. It was over $40 billion budget. This year, the Democrats forced through a $38.5 billion budget. So we've gone from $15 billion to $38.5 billion in less than 20 years. But no, that still does not grow government fast enough for the Democrats. They want to take even more money. They want to raise taxes even more. They want to keep even more money. And so, for them, the number one obstacle that they have to overcome is the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. Everybody remembers the $750 checks that came out last year? That refund was mandated by the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. The Taxpayer Bill of Rights says that if the state takes in more money than it's allowed to spend, they have to refund the rest back out to the citizens. So last year was somewhere around $4 billion that was refunded out. This year, it's forecasted to be about the same, about $4 billion. The forecast is everyone's going to get between a $650 and $800 check. That is as a result of the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. The left wants to grow government and they can't stand that. So, you've heard the saying, never let a crisis go to waste. Here was their plan. We know that people's property taxes just went up. So, rather than take a 2-year timeout like the Republicans proposed, what the Democrats said is, hey, let's drop the property tax rate. We'll just arbitrarily drive the property tax rate down. The problem there for them is, like we said earlier, property taxes fund schools. The Democrats don't want to get beat up for taking money out of schools, fire departments, police departments, all of that local government infrastructure. So what they said is, hey, we're going to arbitrarily lower the property tax how much you owe on your property taxes. But then we are going to take all of your taxpayer bill of rights refunds and back pay those local governments using your taxpayer bill of rights refunds. This is what you will see on the ballot this November in the form of Proposition HH. What Proposition HH does is it says, hey, the state will drop your property taxes, not by much. I crunched the numbers. For the average person, it's a couple of $100s a year. It depends on those three things we talked about. But if you run the numbers, it'll save, the example that I had, a $500,000 property with a normal assessment rate and a normal mill levy saves you like $267. In exchange for the state asking permission to keep your taxpayer bill of rights at an ever-increasing rate every year forever. So if Proposition HH passes this fall, the first year that it goes into effect, the state will be allowed to keep about $130 million that should have been refunded back to the taxpayers. But they slipped one sentence into that bill that says that the amount of money the state can keep increases by 1% compounding annually. So what that means is in 10 years, the state could keep about $1.3 billion. And in 30 years, the state can keep an additional $17 billion annually that should have been refunded back to the folks. In effect, what this does is it allows the left to say, oh no, we didn't repeal the taxpayer bill of rights. It's still on the books, which it would be. It's just Proposition HH guts it by allowing the state to keep an ever-increasing amount of money that right now should be refunded back to the taxpayers. That was the last big fight that we had before the legislature adjourned. They used every trick in the book, Rule 14, Rule 16, to end debate, silence us, shut us up, and tell us nope. So earlier I told you there's 46 Democrats and 19 Republicans. The Democrats take that as, hey, we have a mandate from the voters of Colorado to go forth and implement our big government, vast regulatory plan. But if you actually look at who returned ballots, the Democrats just won a lot of very close races. 46% of Coloradans actually returned a Republican ballot in 2022. So the Greeley House District, out of the tens of thousands of people that voted up there, the Democrats won that seat by 299 votes. So they get a whole representative down at the state capitol for that, even though that Greeley district is basically a purple district. Less than 300 votes determined whether or not that was a Democrat or a Republican in that seat. That was replicated out across several different districts all across Colorado. And so what that means is if the Republicans had gotten, it was about like 15,000 additional votes properly distributed to a lot of these very close races, instead of our numbers being 19 to 46, they would have been 29 to 36. A much closer and more balanced state legislature. And that was what we argued. We said, look, there's only 19 of us, but we still represent 46% of Coloradans who voted Republican, who want smaller government, who want more fiscal restraints, who want more freedom, who want less regulatory burden. And they shut us up via Rule 14 and Rule 16 and did not allow us to bring amendments, debate, or really offer anything substantive to their plan. So, where does that leave us? Well, we already talked a little bit about Proposition HH. You will see that all on your ballot this November. And it will be phrased, they have to use the phrase in there, without raising taxes. It's smoke and mirrors. It doesn't raise taxes, but what it does is it allows them to keep all of your taxpayer bill of rights mandated refunds. So they're not raising taxes, but if it passes, in a few years, you will not see a taxpayer bill of rights refund ever. And the reason they're doing it now is because the economic forecasts say that in the next 3 to 4 years, there's about $10 billion that should be refunded back to the citizens. They don't want to give that $10 billion away. They want to keep that money for themselves. Proposition HH is how they do it. When I say for themselves, I mean for big government and all of their big government agenda. Proposition HH is how they do that. So, the first thing that we got to understand is we have to have these conversations. We have to be educating our friends, our family, our neighbors, and saying, look, just take 10 minutes, do some of your own research on it, understand what Proposition HH does. Because here at Colorado, a lot of the things that Convention of States stands for, we have them. The Taxpayer Bill of Rights requires that we have a balanced budget. We have that amendment here in Colorado. Colorado already has term limits. You're limited to 8 years in the State House and 8 years in the State Senate. They don't like these things, and so they are coming after them. So at the state level, if we want to stand for balanced budgets, if we want to avoid giving more and more money to a government that uses it inefficiently, the first thing that we have to understand is that that starts here in Colorado with voting against Proposition HH and explaining to your friends, your family, your neighbors that, look, even though Proposition HH on this November ballot is going to say without raising taxes, it's taking $10 billion out of the pockets of Coloradans over the next 3 to 4 years. We have to plant the flag. We have to draw that line in the sand and say, this far, no farther. We are going to stand for limited government. We are going to stand for fiscal policy. And we have to have that grassroots outreach to educate our friends, our family, and our neighbors about what Proposition HH actually does. Next year, we don't really know what the legislature is going to do next year. Again, it's these same numbers. They got 46 to 19 in the State House. They got 23 to 12 in the State Senate. Governor Polis is still Governor Polis. So they have another bite at the apple next year for all of the stuff that they couldn't get past this year to try it again. So I hate to say it, but we're on defensive until the November election in 2024, just because of the numbers. So after we get past the short term of educating folks about Prop HH and how that increases government size, spending, and regulation, the next thing that we have to do is we have to start having those conversations about the term that I use is restoring balance in Colorado. That's traditionally been Colorado's hallmark, right? We traditionally have had a very Republican legislature and we usually have a Democrat governor. And out of that, we get balance. We don't have that in Colorado. What we have in Colorado now is groupthink. You have one party that runs everything and they only see things through their particular perspective and they get to make state laws about it. They're driving out insurance companies from the state of Colorado. Did you know that there are certain, so if you drive a Kia or a Hyundai, there's certain makes, models, and years of those vehicles where you cannot get insurance for it if you go anywhere near the Denver area because the crime is so bad, and the insurance companies will not insure it because the liability is too high for them? That is 100% something that the left has done and manufactured. To restore balance to the state, to get to the place where you can actually get a Hyundai and get insurance for it, we have to get back to balance. And that means talking to our friends, our family, our neighbors about why all of these things are important, why limited government is important, why putting more money back into taxpayers' pockets is important, why reducing regulation and liability for everybody is important. Because once you take freedom away, once you impose all of this regulation, liability, and taxation on everyone, guess what? That doesn't help everybody that's worried about being able to put food on the table, being able to drive their kids to school without having their car stolen, and actually be able to have their kids get an education. We have to positively communicate that message. Right now, a lot of times, those of us that are more conservative, that like smaller government, we get accused of being against everything and for nothing. All we do is we point out what's wrong, but we don't have any sort of positive solution. We have to talk about the positive solution. We have to talk about how these principles of smaller government, balanced budget, and less regulation actually make folks' lives better, how they reduce prices, how they make it easier to put food on the table, how they result in better community safety, how defending things like the Second Amendment actually makes communities safer. You can see that in Weld County. When the sheriff in Weld County took office, he said one of his top goals is to get as many folks certified with their concealed carry permits as possible. They went from like 5,000 concealed carry permits in Weld County to I think they're like 25,000 now. Guess what? Weld County's crime has ticked up a little bit, but nothing like Denver. So we have to be able to talk positively about how these values that we have actually do make folks' life better. And so that's my challenge to you all. As you leave here, just take that with you, have those conversations with your friends, your family, and your neighbors. Because if we don't do that now, then what world, what state are we leaving for the next generation? right? I've sworn 4 separate oaths to uphold and defend the Constitution and take care of my community. U.S. Army, Colorado Army National Guard, Ohio Police Department, and as a state legislator. And I'm doing it for my friends and my family so that my kids can also have a chance to have the American dream. And if we don't do this today, I can't guarantee that everything that I fought in those 4 oaths that I've sworn, that I can pass that American dream on to my kids. So that pretty much wraps up what I have. We got a few minutes left, so I figured I'd just take questions. So if you got a question, raise your hand, and I will do my best to answer it.
You have to put it this way, all the way to now.
Okay, can you hear me? You can hear me, right? You get a microphone if you ask a question. You haven't done this, it's fun. Anybody? That gentleman there has a mic. Oh, hi.
Oh,
I know you.
I found out because a lot of your campaign that there are an ever-growing majority of independent voters. They've left the Democratic Party, they've left the Republican Party, and I was one. And you know that. But what I saw, and I didn't really understand the dynamics of it, and just talking a little bit that I had in my district as involved at the caucus level, is that you talk about freedom, but what they were really hearing was free. If you vote Democratic, you're gonna get something for free. And I think I don't know how to address that, but I think it was really important in how the independents, more of them than there are either party, if I'm right. I could be wrong. But they were convinced that the Democrats were giving them something for free. And my one neighbor, when I talked to him about it, just one neighbor, he said, I really didn't need it, but we took it. How many people signed the check they got from the government, whether they were Republican or Democrat? We all signed the checks, we all took the money. And I think, to me, how do we deal with freedom as the real core issue versus what's free, which is short-term Democratic offerings. And one thing, and you can tell me if I'm wrong or not, but I heard just in the last 2 weeks, I think, that right now, and I'm not sure if it's national or Colorado, that the difference between people who are actually middle-class wage earners is approximately the same amount of money per year as people who get their money from the entitlement programs of the federal government. It's even. The people that are working are battling the same housing costs, the same things with people that get all of those programs. So my asking you is, how in the world do we change that?
Okay, good. Please. Yeah. So, as a police officer, I go out and I say, hey, you're stealing other people's cars. I literally caught you driving a car with the ignition punched out. Bad. Don't steal people's cars. I arrest them. Even though I arrested them, here in America, we have the constitutional right to a trial by jury. You are not guilty until the jury of your peers convicts you. And so what that meant is, as a police officer, all of my cases, all of righteous cases where I legitimately found a bad guy doing bad stuff, a lot of those cases would go to a jury trial. And if you think about it, a jury trial is basically like a mini election. You got 12 folks drawn at random from the community that got told, hey, you have to come here, you have to have an opinion about something. And then you got 2 very professional teams, the prosecution and the defense, that make arguments to the jury. And at the end of the day, both sides are trying to convince the jury guilty or not guilty. The jury's got to vote guilty or not guilty. What I learned going through jury trials that's applicable to what you just asked is the fact that people don't think intellectually. People will think emotionally first, and I'll give you an example. In the state of Colorado, if you drive drunk and you get arrested for it, you're going to get charged with a DUI. If you have kids in the back of the car when you're driving drunk, you're going to get charged with a DUI and what amounts to basically recklessly endangering a child. So 2 different charges. One of my young officers had a case like that. It went to jury trial. DUIs are the most heavily litigated misdemeanor level crime in the country, just because it takes away people's driver's licenses and their ability to get around. And so what that means is that when police officers talk about how they were able to establish that somebody was drunk, there's a very mathematical, scientific process that they have to follow to be able to scientifically establish that somebody was intoxicated. So my officer has this case, he goes to trial, he takes about 45 minutes and very scientifically, mathematically, logically, intellectually lays out the case for why we know this individual was drunk. The jury votes to acquit on the DUI. And then he tells the story about, and then there was this kid in the back seat of the car, when I found him, and so that's why we charged the reckless endangerment to a child. Even though the jury just acquitted on the DUI and said, we don't think this guy is drunk, they convicted on the reckless endangerment for the child. And so my cop comes back to me and goes, this makes absolutely no sense, right? The jury literally acquitted on the DUI. You have to have the DUI before you can prove that the kid was in danger. If the guy's not drunk, the kid can't be in danger. But the jury acquitted on the DUI, convicted on the child abuse, right? And I asked him, I was like, why do you think that happened? We talked about it. When he was talking about the jury, when he was talking about the DUI, he's talking mathematically, scientifically, logically, intellectually. Didn't connect with the jury. As soon as he started telling the story about the kid in the back seat, now he's engaging people emotionally. He's connecting with them. He's resonating them at a different level, to the point where even in a court of law, with the judge giving the juror instructions, they couldn't quite see the contradiction between, acquitting on the DUI and convicting on the reckless endangerment toward the child. You can see this all over the Bible, right? The Apostle Paul talks about this. Whenever he goes to different places, he mimics their culture. When he goes to Ephesus, Ephesians, right? This is a major center of Roman power. So this is where he starts talking about things like, the armor of God, the sword of the Spirit, all of this stuff, because that's imagery that resonates with them at an emotional level because they live in this major center of Roman power. When he goes to Athens, right? We have the Mars Hill dialogue. He changes how he talks to these people. He connects with them emotionally. He says, I can see that you all are a very religious people. And you have an altar to a lot of different deities here, to including the unknown God. Let me tell you about the unknown God. He's connecting with them emotionally. That is what we have to do when we have these conversations with folks. We have to do what it says in the second greatest commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. The old saying is true. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And a lot of times, those of us that want smaller government, less taxes, lower regulation, we get trapped because we want to talk intellectually and logically about why these are good things, but we don't really carry that emotional argument. We don't show that we actually care about them and that we're actually trying to help them have a better life. Because at the end of the day, there is no such thing as a free, the economist saying that I had at college was tin staffel. There's no such thing as a free lunch. The government's giving you something free, the government doesn't give anybody anything for free. It all comes from taxes. So if you're getting something for free, it's actually coming out of your taxes. And the more free stuff that the government gives you, that means the more taxes they have to collect, except they also take their cut out of it because they got the middleman in there. So being able to explain that to them, being able to say, well, they're not giving you anything for free. They're giving it to you because they taxed you for it. And then they took their cut out because they're the middleman. And being able to make that positive emotional argument for why there's a better way, that's what we have to do. We have to have that emotional connection with people. We have to do that second greatest commandment and show that we love our neighbor as ourselves and build that emotional rapport before that they're actually going to listen to the fact that our economics is better than the big government leftists.
Okay, more questions? It's just after 5 o'clock, please. Here you go, hold it close.
Colorado was a red state not that long ago, and then 4 billionaires got together and set up a bunch of nonprofits where they can donate money, dark money, as it's called, untraceable. And so they bought Colorado. So, how are we going to buy it back? I'm not the billionaire, I'm sorry, but I'm just wondering where are we going to find those?
Good, thank you.
Yeah, so you've obviously read the blueprint. So about 20 years ago, there was a group of 4 mega millionaires to billionaires, Jared Polis, Tim Gill, Pat Stryker, and Rupp Bridges. that basically all came together and they said, hey, we think that with all of our billions of dollars, we can do exactly what you just described, which is we can set up a bunch of different corporations and entities to be able to leverage influence, to be able to emotionally resonate with people, to get them to vote Democrat. And you can see where that got us now, right? So how do we come back from there? Well, the first thing is, we haven't won an election, a big election in Colorado since 2014. Cory Gardner was the last big, contested win that we had. For the last 10 years, we've been sliding further and further left, more and more and more into groupthink. And so what we have to do is, first thing is we got to draw that line in the sand and plant the flag and say, this far, no farther. And that's hard to do, particularly when we're the party that believes in freedom, personal, individual freedom. I like to make the analogy between my mom grew up Catholic, so I can say this, between Catholics and Protestant. How many different Protestant denominations are there?
Bunches.
Hundreds and hundreds of Protestant denominations, right? Because they are Protestant. That comes from protest. They said, we do not like what the Catholic Church monolith was doing. We believe that we can talk directly to God ourselves. We're going to go do things our own way. And so you have, hundreds of different Protestant denominations out there, whereas the Catholic Church tends to be large and monolithic. You have the same thing in the big government side versus the smaller government side. The smaller government folks, guess what? We're like Protestants. We say, I don't need no government telling me what to do. In fact, I don't need no organization telling me what to do. And we go 57 different ways from Tuesday. So the first thing that we have to do is we have to figure out how do we actually unify the folks that want smaller government, less taxes, less regulation. Because if we can't all come together, we're going to get steamrolled by the other side. I mean, we saw it this last election. The Republicans, again, I'm trying not to be partisan here, but one side raised a pile of money and the other side had about 6 times that much money. So one side spent $6 for every $1 the other side sent in this last election. And until we actually can unify, until we can actually come together and say, hey, these are the big things that we agree on, and we're all going to try to work together, we're not even, no billionaire is going to be like, hey, I'm going to invest money in Colorado, because all we're doing is fighting ourselves. You hear the term circular firing squad. We have a circular firing squad quite often in Colorado amongst folks that believe in small government, lower taxes, less regulation, and more freedom. And so we have to figure out how do we unify, how do we actually come together, agree on a couple of key big issues, plant that flag, draw the line in the sand, say this far, no farther, and then we have to actually start winning some elections. Because until we win elections, nobody's going to invest money in the state because they're like, why would I give money to Colorado? All that happens is the money goes there and we lose a bunch of really, really close races. There is no return on that investment. So we have to get along, draw that line in the sand, plant that flag, and then we actually have to show, look, with this, we talk about the triangle, candidate, money, message. You got to get a good candidate that can carry a message that resonates with people, and you got to have money so that you can get that message out on TV, newspaper, radio, all the different other places that you spread that message around.
Anyone else? All right, there you go.
It's not a question that I have, but it's a comment, actually. People need to start looking at it that socialism is free and takes away your freedom.
We have a communist party in the state, right?
Pardon me?
I said, we have like an active, thriving communist party in the state of Colorado. And he can tell you, the last couple of weeks of the session, I look out on the west steps of the Capitol, I'm like, okay, there's obviously another group down here, protesting about something, and they're all wearing red shirts.
Yes.
And I get close and I'm like, oh my goodness, it's the Communist Party of Colorado.
Yeah.
They're out there, they're alive, they're well.
They're absolutely out there, and we have, people need to open up their eyes that we have China coming in. And China has literally put their police stations next to the police stations in California. So that ought to be enough to start getting people to wake up. That we need to, if you want your freedom, you need to start fighting for it.
Thank you.
It goes back to the old adage of you can't make changes if you can't get your policy passed. And you can't get your policy passed if you don't have a majority. So we can talk about it till we're blue in the face, but until we can actually carry that message in a way that positively resonates with our friends, with our families, with our neighbors, the numbers, by the way, 27% of Coloradans are registered Democrats, 24% are registered Republicans, and 48% are registered unaffiliated.
Yeah.
So until we can actually carry a message that resonates with unaffiliated voters, with Republicans, with Democrats, and there's Democrats. I was talking to a Democrat on Friday afternoon, right? Absolutely pro-domestic energy, does not want China, Russia, Venezuela supplying Americans with energy. So we can build those bridges with Democrats, right? I'm not saying that Democrats are all bad and Republicans are all good. You have to have that individual conversation with another human being created in the image of God and be able to show them, hey, here's why I think what I think. Here's both the logic and the emotions behind it. And when you do that, then that's the part where you can start then winning elections to get the majority so that then you can actually have policy change that solves these problems. And until you get to at least a majority somewhere, we talk about it till we're blue in the face, and the 46 of the folks down at the state capitol that want more big government and more higher taxes and don't really care about the integrity of the United States borders, they're going to continue to get their way.
Okay.
Yeah. Factually, what is the government made of?
Factually,
Factually.
I mean, it's in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. You start with we.
Is it made up of men and women?
Like, are you asking are there other genders?
Is men and women who run the government?
Yeah, yes, men and women, human beings.
Okay. All of these people are the sovereigns of this country and of the state. Where do they get authority to tax the people?
At the end of it,
They were voted by the people of this small state. If they were elected, they were voted by people like us.
Did you vote for your people to tax you?
No, but I filled out the ballot and put it in the box.
You voted for them, but did you give them authority to tax you?
I guess.
We don't have authority to be taxed. We're the sovereigns of this country. And this is a problem that goes on in this country and in Colorado. People believe that they are to be taxed. We're not to be taxed. We are the sovereigns of this country. Got court cases galore that state that.
Okay.
thank you.
Yeah.
There's a lot of political theory that goes into it. Like I said, at the end of the day, though, when I have 46 to 19 in the state house, 23 to 12 in the state senate, and a governor, we can be intellectually right all day long, and they're going to say we've got majorities and supermajorities, tough beans, this is what we're going to do. So that's why we have to carry that message to actually start to change the way that folks are thinking, to be able to win elections, to be able to restore balance back to this country and back to this state. Who else?
Gabe, I have one. I'll give it to you next. I don't know whether you read about this, the Oregon State Legislature. Do you know what happened there this year in that?
I heard
The
something about it.
Republicans, around about end of April, they walked out, and it denied a quorum, the way their legislative rules are written, and they didn't come back for 8 weeks. And of course, the legislature, the Democrats, tried all kinds of things to try to make them criminals and fine them and all of that. But at the end of it, they managed to gain some concessions. And then the Republicans came back and they were able to finish the session. Do you think our Republican caucus, either in the state Senate or the House, would even consider that type of radical action in order to make a point and bring things to a halt?
That's an easy question, because we did. So the state House Republicans, all 19 of us, we walked out too at the end of this year when we were talking about, so it was Senate Bill 303 when it was in the state House, and then once it got passed, then it became Proposition HH. So in Colorado, unlike other states, a quorum is a simple majority. So if you have 33 folks in the state house, 18 folks in the state senate, that's a quorum, which means that's enough members there to be able to legally do business. So when the 19 of us walked out, they were able to continue doing their business and passing laws and doing all the stuff that they were going to do. Our walkout was to show the fact that, look, we don't have a voice in the state house. 46% of Coloradans, who we also represent, that we also speak for, do not have a voice in the state house because they keep using Rule 14 and Rule 16 to silence us, censor us, and not let us speak up for our constituents. So we also staged a walkout. Unlike Oregon, I'm assuming Oregon's threshold for a quorum is a little bit higher.
Yes, I remember reading that. Good point.
Yeah, Oregon has a higher quorum requirement than we do in Colorado. So when the legislators in Oregon did that, they were able to actually stop the lawmaking in Oregon. In Colorado, because we have a lower threshold for a quorum, all that did was just attract a little bit of publicity to the fact that why are all the Republicans standing out on the west steps of the Capitol and not voting? And then we had an opportunity to try to convey that message to the media of, look, they're silencing us, they're censoring us in there. We're literally not allowed to represent the voice of 46% of Coloradans. So we're standing out here having our own protest. This is how we're going to represent our constituents right now, because that at least attracted some media attention so that we could talk about what was happening. So yeah, thank you for that. We did have a walkout. We just have a lower quorum requirement.
By the way, we did not set that up.
So when
when
the Republicans do a press event, there'll be like maybe 2 TV cameras there and 3 or 4 reporters. When the Democrats do a press event, because they have all the power, they have like 20 or 30 TV cameras and 50 reporters, right? So just us being able to get our message out is hard right now because we're irrelevant. Nobody listens to us because we can't really stop or pass anything. So a walkout, hey, wow, we got 5 TV cameras down there. I mean, that was a 250% increase in media exposure. And it gives us that opportunity to carry that message. So yes, we did walk out.
Cool.
It unfortunately doesn't slow the works much here in Colorado. Go ahead.
My question is, you guys have got such a slim amount of people down there now. What a lot of us need to do is figure out which seats are in trouble as far as the 46 or whatever we got down there. And I don't know if somebody's kind of looking at the numbers on the last post. We could get like a plan together or something if they could, give us name. Maybe we could.
I'll give you names right now.
You know what? We have to compare numbers. I have 16 House Democrats that I think are beatable.
Okay, that's exactly my question.
Good. I definitely like that.
Yeah, so I'll let you get with him. I'll tell you just in this area though, we lost the district in Greeley by 299 votes, and then the one over in Erie was a little bit more than that. But again, very, very close margins. So again, it's just getting out, having those conversations, being engaged, and helping us get across the finish line for those of us that stand for smaller government, more freedom, less taxes.
Let's see, we had the,
You keep going, please, Gabe. But I need 3 minutes at the very end. And
Yeah,
we're
sure.
Right at exactly 1 hour. I was 1 minute late starting, and it's 5:16. But I have about 3 minutes. I gotta do some selling for convention to state. Go ahead, finish your answer, please.
Great question. I want to add one other statistics here to Gabe's 46% and trying to Republican ballot. Even more. You add in the Libertarian vote, we're a 49-51 state, and all those 5 House districts that were lost because of the Libertarian vote. I give Dave Williams, the new state GOP chair, a lot of credit for going and talking to the Libertarian Party and say you got to stop spoilers. And when you get down to it, and you really look at who returned ballots, etc., we're real close. We are a 51, a 49, 50-50 state. Yes?
I just had one more final comment about that. This kind of ties in with what we've been talking about way back at the beginning, when our nation was first working on what a constitution would look like. There was a comment by Benjamin Franklin. I don't know if you know that. Benjamin Franklin, I think at that time, had a position, I don't know what it was then, but they were having all the squabbles we talked about tonight. he knew that they were so divided. There were two things he did. The first thing he said, we have stopped praying. We stopped praying. We used to pray when we were in the war stage. We used to pray all the time together. Every day, we'd start with that. He said, we stopped. This is Benjamin Franklin, not a pastor or clergy. But one of the things he said then, and I think it applies to us, he said, if we don't find a way to hang together, they're going to hang us.
Yeah, we will hang
And I think that's exactly what we're talking about. We've got to find a way to hang together, or they're going to hang us.
So I think, right, we're in a church, we can tell Bible stories here, right? So we all know what happened with King Saul and King David, where King David was the actual effective leader, right? King Saul had his moment in the sun where he, went out and saved the citizens of Jabesh Gilead, and then he kind of went off the rails, and then everybody knew David's star was rising right now, and that's why Saul was persecuting David. And so you have a period of time in Israel where Israel is very, very fractured. But then, as David's star starts to rise, Saul dies, and then David comes. He's the king over Judah and Hebron, but then you have the rest of Israel that still follows the house of Saul. And there's civil war for 7 years between Israel. There's a part in there. You may have heard the book called Understanding the Times by Dr. David Noble. It comes out of a passage in Chronicles where it's talking about as David's star is rising, and he's starting to do exactly that. He's starting to be able to pull the nation back together, and it's giving another list of all of the people that used to follow the house of Saul that are now coming over to the house of David. And there's a verse in there where it talks about, and then there came 200 sons of Issachar, and with them all their families, wise men, men who understood the times and knew what to do. That's where we're at right now. We're at the point where we need to have wisdom. As a kid, I would read Proverbs, and I'm like, oh, I saw Solomon the wisest guy in the world, and you read Proverbs again, and you're like, oh, wow, okay, I sort of get it now. We have to have leaders, we have to have folks that all come together, that understand the times, understand what to do, understand that practical wisdom to fulfill the second greatest commandment. Love your neighbor as yourself. You go over to James, and in James it talks about, or in the parable of the sheep and the goat, if you have somebody that's hungry and needy and doesn't have clothes, and you say, depart in peace, be warmed and filled, and you don't do anything to feed them, to clothe them, to be able to give them, to care for them as a human being, you've denied the faith and you're worse than an unbeliever. That's why I'm ultimately in politics and do this stuff, is it's to fulfill that second greatest commandment, to love your neighbor as yourself. And I say it is not loving to have your neighbor be overtaxed, overregulated, having all of their money being siphoned off to the government, having public safety fall apart, having them not be able to afford energy and food, having a situation where they can't get an education for their kids. That is not loving to leave it that way. And so we have to have folks that understand the times, that can do what you said, understand that if we don't hang together, we're all going to hang separately, and come together to be able to advocate for those things that we believe and those things that made this country what it is.
All right, I think, Wayne, why don't you put it to a close?
Well, I think I'm going to hopscotch exactly where you just left off and where Kathy, and by the way, Kathy Bloom was the one that took care of the water for us. And I took my share of it, that's for Doug, I'm sure. And take someone who's out there. But I have to make a little bit of a sale here. This was a Convention of States meeting that allowed us to have a town call because myself, Daryl, and others are actual constituents of Gabe Evans. And because of that, we don't break any of the laws. We didn't support Gabe. Maybe I did. Maybe Daryl did. That's up to me and my God. Exactly where Gabe stopped, I would like to start, and kind of what Kathy was saying in regard to prayer. What can each of you do when you leave here today? You can sign the Convention of States petition. You can push for Article 5 of the Constitution as it was written in 1787. The exact words that Colonel George Mason put in 2 days before the Constitution was signed. We, the people, can propose through our state representatives 3 amendments. These are only suggestions. It's got to go to the state. All 34 states, just 2/3, term limits, fiscal responsibility, states' rights, get the federal government back where they belong, behind bars in Washington. And that wasn't written, sorry, John, I'm going off my script. But in any event, please make sure that you do sign the Convention of States petition. They are available with Vivian out at our banner. And I would also like to offer something Wayne Walvoord is presenting, the Biblical Citizenship course that's being offered by Patriot Academy. And there's a sign-up sheet across from where the Convention of States is, if you just have interest in it. Because I can do it online, or we can do it in person. There is an abbreviated course to this book, and this is free online. It is $20 to buy the hard copy, and it has a little bit of the, I think it's the 1829 biblical constitution that was taught to all the school kids in the 1800s. It has nice questions with each of the 8 programs. They're on video. I don't know all of this stuff. I don't know anywhere near the amount of biblical quotations that Gabe knows. This book has it, but it asks them questions after it talks about them. But then there's a cheat sheet in the back of the book with all the answers. And I've asked questions like, I can't even think of something. But I had to go to the back of the book. And in one of the meetings that we've had them here monthly at Harvest Fellowship Church. And they're in the classroom. And we have some videos, we have questions. I use some of these questions sometimes, but I would like anybody that has interest in something other than strictly Convention of States, it's the Constitution. So there is a sign-up sheet. If you have interest, this is no obligation kind of thing. It would be something that I can call you, send an email that would allow people to have a choice as to time, place, Zoom meeting, or personal. So give some thoughts about that. And I think Vivian did have out at the front, for those of you who do not have a Constitution book, Article 5 is very, very short. Very short. We the people, when 2/3 of the 34 states right now, we have 19, and John, is it about 3 more that may be possible for Mark Meckler?
19 states.
We have 19 now, but maybe...
But there are 2, North Carolina and Kansas, where it has passed through both houses of the legislature. I won't go into the details, but they gotta work it through the waterworks in order to get it, officially passed as a state constitution question in Kansas. I would say de facto we're at 21 states.
That's what Mark Meckler said.
We got 13 more to go. Which ain't bad in 10 years.
I think Mark Meckler made that exact comment with maybe 22. 2 days ago, we had a simulated constitution, and there's a Zoom meeting on Monday morning with Kevin Lundberg, whom Gabe knows, and is a past representative of the Colorado State and of the Senate, and is very active with Article 5. And by the way, also, I think there are a couple of pocket guides for the Convention of the States, which is available online, free, just conventionofthestates.com. But I want to thank all of you who did come.
Wait, I have something I'd like to say.
Yes, sir.
Here, this room should be filled today. And it's not. Okay? We got to start telling people about this. Right? Our nation is in trouble, and we're so comfortable in this country. We're so, I'm trying to think of the right word.
Apathetic.
Thank you. Yeah, we need that. There should be all kinds of people here. Each one of us has to, we just tell 2 people, and they tell 2 people. It's the old geometric progression. But it's, we're really in trouble. So,
I would like a hand for Representative Bill and Bob, our sound team. Thank you.